December 31st, 1941. Richmond, California, 11:45 p.m. The shipyard lights cut through the Pacific fog like floodlights over a battlefield. Sparks showered from steel plates being welded, their glow flickering across the weary faces of men and women who hadn't seen a full night's sleep in weeks. The clang of rivet guns, the hiss of acetylene torches, and the low rumble of cranes filled the air, a mechanical symphony for a nation at war. Foreman Jack McCarthy wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting against the glare. "Keep that seam tight, boys. She's got to float before dawn," he barked, his voice cracking above the metallic chaos. Behind him, 1,000 tons of steel, soon to be known as the SS John W. Brown, waited to take form. It had been just 24 days since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. America was still reeling, scrambling to build the war machine it would need to fight across 2 oceans. But nowhere was the transformation more dramatic than here, in the sprawling shipyards along the American coasts. In 1940, the United States had built only a handful of merchant ships a year. Now, the demand was impossible. Thousands of cargo ships were needed to transport tanks, trucks, and food to Europe and the Pacific. The British called them Liberty ships, humble, functional, and built for one purpose, to carry the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. Each ship was 441 feet long, made from welded steel instead of riveted plates, powered by a simple triple expansion steam engine. They weren't pretty, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to float, and fast. Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate known for building dams, looked out over his Richmond Shipyard No. 2 from a high platform that night. The Pacific wind tugged at his coat as he watched hundreds of workers swarm like ants around the half-assembled hulls. He turned to his superintendent and said quietly, "We'll do it differently. We'll build ships like cars, parts first, then assembled hulls." He turned to his superintendent and said quietly, "We'll do it differently. We'll build ships like cars, parts first, then assemble." That idea, prefabrication, would change everything. Instead of constructing ships piece by piece in one place, Kaiser divided the process into dozens of specialized workshops. One built bow sections, another assembled the stern, others worked on decks, bulkheads, or engine rooms. When each section was complete, cranes would lift them into position like giant Lego bricks, welding them into a whole. The workers came from everywhere, farmers from Kansas, steelworkers from Pittsburgh, and for the first time, tens of thousands of women. Rosie the Riveter, with her red bandana and rolled-up sleeves, became more than propaganda. She was real, standing shoulder to shoulder with men, welding steel at 2 a.m. while the world burned overseas. The first Liberty ships took months to build, then weeks, then days. The rhythm was relentless, day and night shifts overlapping, sirens marking the end of one shift and the beginning of another. Every clang of a hammer, every spark from a torch, was a step closer to victory. One cold morning in January 1942, a massive hull began to slide down the greased ways into the bay. The crowd erupted in cheers as the ship hit the water with a thunderous splash. Kaiser turned to his team. "Next one," he said simply. The race was on, not against the clock, but against Hitler's U-boats, which prowled the Atlantic, sinking Allied ships faster than they could be built. The question was no longer whether America could fight, but whether it could outbuild destruction itself. As the sun rose over the bay, the fog lifted, revealing dozens of hulls in various stages of construction. Steam rose from cranes, men shouted orders, and the smell of oil and steel filled the air. In that moment, America's industrial heart began to beat louder than ever before, and its rhythm would echo across oceans. The challenge ahead was unimaginable, to launch a new Liberty ship every 4 days. But to the men and women in these yards, it wasn't madness. It was destiny. April 10, 1942. Richmond Shipyard No. 2. 3:20 a.m. Steam rolled off the harbor like mist from a battlefield. Floodlights burned white against the fog, illuminating the skeletal forms of half-built ships that rose from the docks like metallic beasts mid-berth. The night shift was in full swing, welders crouched under tarps, rivet guns barked in rhythm, and the rumble of cranes echoed across the bay. At the far end of the yard, a flatbed truck screeched to a stop. On its trailer sat a massive pre-assembled section of hull, freshly painted with the bold white letters, Hull 217. A crane operator named Alma Hernandez adjusted her gloves and radioed the foreman. "Section 3 ready for lift," she said calmly, though her heart raced every time she moved one of these steel giants. Below her, spotters waved lanterns, their signals sharp and practiced. The crane cables went taut. The enormous steel section rose into the night sky, dangling over workers like a floating cathedral. Sparks rained as welders below prepped the seams where the piece would be joined. When it touched down, a chorus of hammer strikes and shouts followed, a sound that had become the anthem of America's new kind of warfare. Production. Henry Kaiser's prefabrication system had transformed the yard into something out of science fiction. Instead of one massive assembly site, Richmond operated like an orchestra, each section built independently, then united in a final crescendo of welding, bolting, and painting. By spring 1942, the shipyard no longer built ships from the ground up, it assembled them from pieces built by hundreds of small teams. Entire bow sections were constructed in one building, sterns in another, and engines were dropped into place like puzzle pieces. The workforce, which had tripled in size since December, was now 90,000 strong. Workers poured in from every corner of the nation. Many had never seen the ocean before. Some had never even held a wrench. African-American men from the Deep South, Navajo steelworkers from New Mexico, farmers from Nebraska, and women from across the country all worked side by side, learning fast or getting left behind. Doesn't matter who you were before, Kaiser liked to say. You're a shipbuilder now. The work was brutal. The heat from the torches baked the skin, the noise shook the bones, and the smell of burnt metal clung to everything. Mist mixed with smoke until it seemed the whole yard lived inside a storm. But in that chaos, a strange unity formed. Everyone knew the stakes. Every Liberty ship that left these waters carried not just cargo, but hope, food for Britain, weapons for the Soviets, supplies for soldiers fighting in deserts and jungles thousands of miles away. By mid-1942, the shipyards across the U.S., from Richmond to Portland, from Baltimore to New Orleans, were racing each other in a friendly kind of industrial warfare. Each yard boasted of faster launches, tighter welds, cleaner decks. Newspapers printed headlines like Kaiser's yard launches ship in 7 days, and American shipyards outrun Hitler's U-boats. It wasn't propaganda anymore, it was fact. At the peak of production, 18 shipyards were building Liberty ships simultaneously, launching one every 4 days on average. Richmond alone could see multiple launches a week, each christened by a local volunteer, each greeted by the blare of horns and cheers that rolled like thunder over the bay. One of the most astonishing feats came that summer when Kaiser's crews decided to prove just how far they'd come. They set out to build a Liberty ship, from keel laying to launch, in less than 5 days. The result was the Robert E. Pay, completed in a record-breaking 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. For the men and women of Richmond, the launch wasn't just a record, it was a revelation. America could now outproduce the destruction that had once seemed unstoppable. Every time a U-boat sank a Liberty ship, 2 more were already sliding into the water. As the shipyard sirens blared and another vessel eased into the bay, Alma Hernandez watched from her crane cab. The ship's name was painted across its bow in proud white letters, reflecting the floodlights. She smiled, knowing that tomorrow, or the day after, another one would stand where this one had. The war was far from over, but here in Richmond, victory no longer felt impossible. It felt like assembly line work. September 2nd, 1943. Richmond Shipyard No. 3. Dawn. The sun rose red over the San Francisco Bay, cutting through a haze of smoke and fog. A whistle blew, shrill and piercing, signaling the change of shift. The night crew, faces smudged with soot, eyes heavy from exhaustion, streamed toward the gates. As they passed, the day shift marched in, boots clanging on the steel walkways, lunch pails swinging in rhythm. For nearly 2 years now, the Richmond shipyards had not slept. Neither had America. Inside the welding bays, the air shimmered with heat. Sparks burst and died like fireworks as women in denim coveralls crouched over seams, goggles glowing green with reflected flame. One of them, Mary Image Carter, rolled her neck and adjusted her torch. She was 22, a former waitress from Fresno who joined the war effort after her husband shipped out to the Pacific. She struck the flame and began tracing a seam along the ship's inner bulkhead. Her partner, a lanky teenager named Paul from Oklahoma, handed her the next rod without a word. Above them, a supervisor shouted over the din, "Keep it moving. Section 12 needs to be ready by 4. They worked without stopping. Breaks were short. The food was greasy, the hours long, but they all understood why they were here. Every crate of ammunition, every truck, every sack of flour sent across the Atlantic depended on these steel hulls holding together. In the yards, patriotism wasn't about speeches or flags. It was about motion, hands moving, machines roaring, steel bending to willpower. The shipyard cafeteria served 30,000 meals a day. Posters lined the walls, "The man who builds a ship also fights the war. Finish the job, your work saves lives." Some laughed bitterly at the slogans, but most took them to heart. Kaiser, ever the optimist, called his workers soldiers of the home front. He made sure they had healthcare, childcare, and housing, things unheard of in most industries at the time. The new Kaiser Permanent Health Plan, born from necessity, kept workers on the job and families alive. But the speed came at a cost. Accidents were common. Burns, crushed limbs, even deaths. The yards were dangerous, molten metal, swinging cranes, high platforms slick with oil. Every clang and hiss could mean progress or disaster. One afternoon, while lowering a pre-assembled bow section, a crane cable snapped. The steel chunk slammed into the deck with a metallic roar. Men scattered, a dozen were injured, 2 killed. Production halted for less than an hour. When the siren sounded again, the work resumed, quieter, steadier, with ice harder than before. Even tragedy couldn't stop the machine. Outside the gates, Richmond itself transformed from a sleepy town into an industrial metropolis. Rows of hastily built housing filled the hills. Neon-lit diners stayed open all night. Children played between rail cars. Every train that left the yards carried parts bound for other shipyards, fueling an interconnected network that spanned the entire west coast. And everywhere, the sense of urgency hung thick. Rumors flew of Allied ships sunk off the coast, of supply convoys lost in the Atlantic. But the workers' response was always the same: build faster. Mary Carter looked up from her torch as a new hull began to slide down the greased ways into the bay. The air was electric. Men and women dropped their tools, cheering as the ship took to the water for the first time. Someone tossed a helmet in the air. Someone else sang the first lines of Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. For a moment, the war felt far away. Then the whistle blew again. Work resumed. Another keel was already being laid. The Liberty ships weren't glamorous, but they were miracles of efficiency, the physical embodiment of American determination. Each launch was a promise. No matter how long the war dragged on, the flow of supplies would not stop. By the end of 1943, the United States was launching 2 Liberty ships per day across all shipyards. The production line had reached a rhythm that even the enemy couldn't comprehend. Hitler had once mocked them as an ugly ducklings. Now, those ducklings carried the arsenal that would drown his war machine. And in the firelit shipyards of Richmond, under the endless hammering of steel, ordinary people had become the beating heart of an industrial miracle. June 12, 1944. Richmond Shipyard No. 1. 9:30 a.m. The bay shimmered under the California sun. Flags lined the dockside, rippling in the warm breeze. Brass bands played at anchors away as workers crowded along the rails, their coveralls streaked with grease and pride. On the slipway below, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien waited, a fresh Liberty ship, her grey hull gleaming, her deck alive with sailors preparing for her first voyage. Just a week earlier, across the Atlantic, thousands of ships had carried Allied soldiers to the beaches of Normandy. The D-Day invasion was the greatest amphibious assault in history, and it had been made possible by vessels like this one. As the christening bottle shattered against the bow, cheers erupted. The Jeremiah O'Brien slid into the water, her engines already humming, bound for war. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. A Navy officer beside Henry Kaiser leaned close and said, "You've built us the bridge to Europe." Kaiser didn't smile. He just nodded, his eyes tracking the grey ship as it moved into open water. To him, it wasn't glory, it was proof. Proof that America could achieve the impossible when united under pressure. By mid-1944, the U.S. had produced over 2,700 Liberty ships, more than any other class of ship in history. They carried everything from ammunition and rations to tanks, aircraft, and entire rail cars. They ferried troops, evacuated the wounded, and sustained armies fighting on every front. But the real story wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the people. There was Alma Hernandez, the crane operator who never missed a shift, guiding her final section into place before her brother's unit landed in France. There was Mary Midge Carter, still welding in Bay 4, who'd received a letter that her husband's transport ship, another Liberty ship, had made it safely through the Atlantic thanks to the convoys she helped build. And there were the tens of thousands who worked without recognition, black, white, Latino, native, men and women alike, all bound by a shared mission that transcended the divisions of peacetime America. When the war began, few had believed the United States could outproduce the Axis powers. Yet by 1945, American shipyards were launching a new vessel every few days, each one a lifeline to victory. Germany's U-boats could sink ships, but they couldn't sink the spirit that built them. In the final months of the war, Liberty ships became a common sight in every port on Earth. From Murmansk to Manila, Naples to Normandy, their boxy silhouettes dotted the harbors, their hulls scarred but unbowed. Many were lost, torpedoed, shelled, or wrecked in storms, but more always followed. When the last Liberty ship rolled off the ways in 1945, the workers of Richmond gathered one final time. The floodlights dimmed, the cranes fell silent, and the hammering stopped. Some wept. Others simply stood, staring at the empty slips where so many ships had been born. The war had given them purpose. Now, peace gave them pause. Years later, the Jeremiah O'Brien, one of the few Liberty ships to survive, would steam once again across the Atlantic to commemorate D-Day's 50th anniversary. On her deck stood old shipyard workers, grey-haired now, listening to the hum of the same engines they had once installed. One man whispered, "We built her in 4 days." That quiet pride, forged in heat, noise, and sacrifice, became part of America's story. The Liberty ships were not elegant, nor fast, nor designed to last forever, but they embodied something far greater, the belief that in the darkest of times, ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Back in Richmond, the shipyards are silent now. The cranes stand rusted against the sky, and weeds grow between the rails. Yet when the wind blows off the bay, you can almost hear it again, the hammering, the welding, the cheers at launch, the echo of an era when steel and sweat built the road to victory. Because in those frantic, sleepless years, America did not just build ships. It built hope, one hull, one rivet, one liberty at a time.